Welcome into another video, and today we are going to be debating on if Charles Tillman should be in the Hall of Fame. Now, he's definitely one of the more interesting players when looking at a potential Hall of Fame resume, and I will admit, you may think I'm a little bit crazy for even throwing this out there, but as a Bears fan and a Chicagoland native, I definitely hear more about his case than probably most viewers or you guys do in general. But after looking into the details, I think he makes a pretty compelling case, even more than his teammates like Lance Briggs, who's a multi-time All-Pro and Pro Bowler, or Owen Krutz, who was on the All-Decades team of the 2000s, and he's the only member of the offensive line All-Decades team of the 2000s not in the Hall of Fame. I think Charles Tillman has a more compelling case than both of those players, and there's three major categories that I want to dive into today, and it's the accolades, the statistics, and the legacy. You've got to check some of those boxes to be in the Hall of Fame. Let's kick it off with the accolades. Looking at the resume of Charles Tillman, he only has one Pro Bowl and two All-Pros. And now stacking that up against the 36 other defensive backs that are in the Hall of Fame, he doesn't fare well. There are only two defensive backs in the Hall of Fame who have 0 first-team All-Pros. One of them is Dick LeBeau, who had 3 Pro Bowl appearances during his career from 1959 to 1972, and the other is Mel Renfro, who had 10 Pro Bowl selections to his name, and being one of the best defenders on the Super Bowl winning Cowboys of the 70s. And there's only one player in the Hall of Fame who has the same amount of All-Pros as Charles Tillman, but the same amount or less Pro Bowls, and that's defensive back of the Cincinnati Bengals, Ken Riley. Now, LeBeau finished top 10 in interceptions over the course of his career, and the same thing with Ken Riley, and their introduction was well after their retirement. And Mel Renfro's 10 Pro Bowl appearances and just being a part of those legacy Cowboys of the 70s definitely got him in. So can Charles Tillman follow in their paths and still make the Hall of Fame despite the serious lack of accolades? But to get an even better comparison here, we need to dive deeper into Charles Tillman's era. There are 7 defensive backs in the Hall of Fame who played over 50% of their careers at the exact same time as Charles Tillman. That is Rondé Barber, Charles Woodson, Champ Bailey, Ed Reed, Troy Polamalu, Darrelle Revis, and Brian Dawkins. And between them players, they averaged 3.7 first-team All-Pros and 8.4 Pro Bowls over the course of their careers, which Tillman falls significantly below and is likely a factor on why he's not in the Hall of Fame right now. So why wasn't Charles Tillman selected to more All-Pros? You got to understand, he was more of a zone-heavy corner in a very zone-heavy Tampa 2 scheme led by the dominant Lovie Smith. So he wasn't labeled this true lockdown presence, even though he was garnering the respect of some of the best wide receivers in the league. Calvin Johnson said that Charles Tillman was one of the few players that he had to bring it against every time. Johnson wrote on his Instagram back in 2016 saying, "Peanut, not many people I played against during my career demanded respect on the field, but not through words or social media. Simply by bringing it every play. It being a will to win, a want to sacrifice not necessarily life, but limb on every play. It being putting the team before self, and U33 exemplified this. You were a hard hat, lunch pail toting, clock punching kind of guy, and I knew with every face-off, if I didn't come with that same intensity, I'd be left coming up short on that terrible Chicago turf. Looking back, I cherished our matchups because, like you said, it was a heavyweight match each time. And trading blows for 60 minutes wasn't easy nor hardly fun, but that's the grind of the game, which we love and thirst for." I also think forced fumbles just weren't that pretty of a stat for defensive backs, and he didn't have a whole lot of peak seasons when it comes to the past defensive statistics. But forced fumbles were Charles Tillman's game. There's nobody like him. Truly, he was pushing the football out, punching the football out at a rate of a defensive lineman. And this is a guy who was an outside zone cornerback. And that's what brings me to my next category, and that is statistics. Does Charles Tillman have the numbers attached to his name to make a case to be in the Hall of Fame? Charles Tillman's 44 first fumbles are the most ever by a defensive back in the history of the NFL, and even ranks him in the top 10 all time alongside Hall of Famers Ricky Jackson and Derek Thomas, tied for 8th all time. Now, if you combine the total number of forced fumbles and interceptions and match them up against the same players that played in the same era of Charles Tillman, he ranks second most all time with 82, trailing the phenomenal Charles Woodson, who has 99. That's more than Dawkins, Reed, Polamalu, Revis, Bailey, and Rondé Barber. But when you factor that into a 17-game pace, so over the course of a season, Charles Tillman's number one amongst the group with 4 interceptions and 4 forced fumbles total, making a total number of 8. That's more than Ed Reed, more than Woodson, all of those guys. He is the best when it comes to a per season average. Now, forced fumbles don't always mean turnovers, right? So I went through all 8 of these players and tracked down every single one of their forced fumbles over the course of their careers and seen how many were recovered. Well, Charles Tillman had 25 of his 44 forced fumbles recovered, bringing his total turnover number to 63, trailing only Ed Reed, who had 7 forced fumbles recovered, bringing his total turnovers forced number to 71, and Woodson, who had 17 recovered, bringing his total number to 82. That's more than Dawkins, Barber, Bailey, Polamalu, and Revis. So amongst the best in his era, his numbers stack up right there with the greats. And even if you look at some of the more modern likely Hall of Famers like Patrick Peterson, Richard Sherman, Stephon Gilmore, even maybe Aqib Talib, Tillman blows them out of the water. If you look at their combined interception and forced fumble numbers, Richard Sherman has 42, Talib 40, Gilmore 40, and Patrick Peterson 38. So even if every single one of their forced fumbles over the course of their career got recovered, it is still statistically impossible for them to have more total turnovers forced than Charles Tillman. But let's drop the forced fumbled numbers here, huh? Let's get into just strictly pass defense statistics. Charles Tillman, amongst the ones who played in his era, ranks 5th in interceptions, more than Revis, Polamalu, and Dawkins. And now if we want to move on to pass deflections, he also ranks 5th, more than Revis, Polamalu, and Reed. Now, I understand how career totals could be skewed, right? Longevity comes into play. So I did what I did earlier in the video. I put that up in a 17-game pace. If you put that over a course of an average season, Charles Tillman had 4 interceptions and 14 pass deflections on average per season, which is very similar to those who played in his era. He has the same amount of interceptions on average per season as Charles Woodson, Champ Bailey, more than Rondé Barber, Darrelle Revis, Polamalu, and Dawkins, trailing only Ed Reed, and his pass deflections are the same thing. Very even amongst the course. So that's pretty solid. And even if we look further into the future and we bring up those more modern likely Hall of Famers like Patrick Peterson, Stephon Gilmore, Aqib Talib, Richard Sherman, he still matches up pretty well. Now, I understand how this does not tell the whole story, right? Some of these guys are seeing much less opportunities at the ball because of how clamps they were, especially if you look at the numbers of Darrelle Revis. People were just genuinely not throwing in his direction. Or you have some of these safety players, these maybe more disruptive around the line of scrimmage guys like Brian Dawkins, who had 26 career sacks. So their play styles are different. The peaks are different. I'm not saying that Pina is better than these players. I'm just trying to prove and establish that his numbers hold up with the greats over the course of a very long career. Now, there's a few tiny little statistics that I still want to touch on before we move on to legacy. I know tackles aren't massive for a defensive back. If you're lockdown cornerback, I think most defensive coordinators can get over the fact that you can't tackle. But Charles Tillman was a very strong run defender and open field tackler. When comparing total tackles amongst those who played in his era, who are Hall of Famers, he ranks 5th with 930. But if you put that over a 17-game pace, nobody averaged more tackles per season than the one and only Charles Tillman, who averaged 94. That's more than his entire era. And another little statistic that I want to talk about is how Charles Tillman was a really good return man once he got the ball in his hands. He ranks top 10 all time with 8 interceptions returned for a touchdown, trailing only amongst his peers, Charles Woodson, who had 11. So when we're talking about the statistics here, I think Charles Tillman has a Hall of Fame case, but we still got to cover legacy. So let's get into legacy. Now, this last part of the video might be the least important when making a Hall of Fame resume. You need the accolades, you need the numbers, but legacy is important. So the question is, has Charles Tillman left a lasting impact on the game? Can you tell the story of football without Charles Tillman? And I don't think you can. For starters and more social aspects of legacy, we'll start here. Since 2020, the NFL has posted a highlight video of a player not named Charles Tillman punching out a football with the caption, "Textbook Peanut Punch" or "Master of the Peanut Punch." 19 times, including 6 in just the last 2 years alone. In Madden 16, the video game, if your team forced a fumble, you got the Peanut Punch Award. And the term or said coined phrase, peanut punch, has its own Wikipedia page. But when we're talking just straight football terms, it gets a lot more serious. Outside of his knack for punching out the football, Charles Tillman was a key contributor on a top 5 scoring defense 5 times over the course of his 13-year career, playing on rosters that featured 2 Super Bowl appearances and 3 NFC championship appearances, 2 NFC championships with the Bears and a Super Bowl with the Bears, and an NFC championship roster and Super Bowl roster with Charles Tillman. Unfortunately, Tillman didn't get to play in either of those games since he tore his ACL, but he was still a factoring piece, a part of that defense. But even well after his retirement, it still gets more serious. His legacy continues to build. In 2022, the NFL labeled the peanut punch as an official football concept, meaning that is a play. That is how you describe that action. But even many players or legendary coaches have touched on the impact that Charles Tillman has made in this game. Pete Carroll in 2017 touched on how it affected player Byron Maxwell, saying he's never backed off of it. He's always stayed with it, and he's been great at it. We use him an example of what we're looking for and how to do it all the time. He's got so many of them. Peanut was the guy that taught him how to do that, and he's never forgot it, and it's been a great part of his game. And that was even after Carroll called Tillman the best in the NFL at knocking out the football in 2015. In a 2024 press conference, TJ Watt touched on how his coach at Wisconsin, Tim Tibesar, who also coached Tillman for a year, emphasized to Watt how Tillman worked on that and got a ball out every day, saying, and I've been doing the punch out since. I mean, Tim Tibesar in college at Wisconsin, he coached Peanut Tillman in Chicago, and he always used to tell me that Peanut used to get a ball out every day in practice, and I've carried that with me. And lastly, during the 2024-25 Eagles Super Bowl run, that Eagles defense used the peanut punch to successfully force a fumble 3 times, and it's not by coincidence. According to this article from John McMullen on Sports Illustrated, Eagles coach Nick Sirianni revealed Tuesday that he had team's vice president of football technology, Patrick Nolan, put together a video package featuring every single peanut punch that forced a fumble in Tillman's storied career so the players and coaches could see them. So with all of that being said, across social media, having a wiki page, Madden features, legendary players and coaches and legacy teams all being touched on after he retired, even having an own official football concept, I would say that you cannot tell the game of football without Charles Tillman. So you guys let me know down below in the comments what you think. Should Charles Tillman be in the Hall of Fame? Should he not be? Explain why, and we'll talk about it. Personally, obviously, I'm a little biased and I'm a Bears fan. I think he should be in the Hall of Fame. Thanks for tuning into another video. I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.